The courtroom felt more like an aquarium than a hall of justice that morning, pale sunlight leaking through the tall windows, catching on polished oak benches, every cough and shuffle amplified in the still air. At the defense table sat Sergeant Marcus Cole, head lowered, hands clasped tightly in chains that looked out of place against the sharp crease of his uniform jacket. His posture carried discipline, his wrists carried judgment. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Sergeant Cole, you claim you disobeyed a direct order, is that correct? That on the night in question, when told to halt, you kept moving?" Marcus lifted his eyes, voice steady but low. "I wasn't running. I was carrying a wounded man." "A wounded man," the prosecutor repeated, pen tapping his file. "And who exactly were you carrying?" Before Marcus could answer, a sharp, grating laugh cut across the room. It came from the gallery, Officer Brett Kincaid, leaning back with his arms crossed, lips curled in mock amusement. Judge Eleanor Phelps snapped her head up. "Officer Kincaid," she said coldly, "another outburst and you'll be removed." Kincaid lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Apologies, Your Honor. Just found it funny." His tone carried no respect. It was a laugh meant to belittle, to remind everyone that Marcus, soldier or not, was in chains. The room shifted uneasily. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes. A man gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. Reporters scribbled furiously in their pads. The stenographer's keys stopped for half a breath. The prosecutor leaned closer to Marcus. "Tell us then, Sergeant, why did you not stop?" Marcus swallowed. "Because the man I carried was bleeding out. His pulse was fading. Seconds mattered." "Seconds," the prosecutor said with a thin smile. "Or was it pride? Playing hero instead of following orders?" From the back, Kincaid chuckled again, softer but no less venomous. This time the defense attorney, Aisha Grant, stood abruptly. Her glasses flashed under the light as she raised a sealed envelope. "If the prosecution insists on mocking heroism, then the court must hear my client's service record. His history is not irrelevant. It defines how he makes decisions under pressure." "Objection," the prosecutor barked. "Irrelevant, prejudicial, this is a civilian matter." Aisha stepped forward, voice clear. "The state opened the door by painting him as reckless. His record shows the truth. He was trained to value lives, even above procedure. The jury deserves to know that." The judge motioned for the file. The seal tore with a crisp rip that seemed to echo louder than the gavel. Judge Phelps scanned the first page, then looked up. "Objection overruled. The record may be read. Limited to relevance in decision-making." A hush fell. Even Kincaid's smirk faltered. Aisha unfolded the papers and began to read, her tone calm but resonant. "United States Army, Sergeant Marcus D. Cole, Combat Medic, Tours, Coast, Kunduz, Deir ez-Zor. Awards, Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart, twice. Commendations, Meritorious Service for Evacuation Under Fire, Commendation for Civilian Rescue During Structural Collapse. Notable Incidents. 1. Crawled under fire to drag 3 wounded soldiers from an ambush. 2. Entered a collapsing school building to carry children out one by one, exiting last." The gallery shifted. Breaths caught. Even the stenographer paused mid-stroke before resuming. Aisha continued. Evaluation notes. Sergeant Cole demonstrates reflexes shaped by medical duty. Prioritizes the wounded above orders. Command sees this not as defiance, but as identity. She lifted the last page. Local coordination record, co-led civilian evacuation drill with Atlanta Police Department, participating officer, Brett Kincaid. Gasps rippled through the benches. Heads turned toward Kincaid. His smirk collapsed, his jaw tight, his hands twitching on his knees. Aisha lowered the file. "So when my client ran toward a man bleeding on the pavement, he wasn't reckless. He was doing what a lifetime of service taught him to do, save lives first." The silence that followed was so heavy it pressed against the walls. Even the air seemed to pause. Kincaid shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat, but the sound rang hollow. Judge Phelps tapped her gavel once, softly. "The record stands. Jury will consider it only as it pertains to the defendant's judgment that night." No one moved. No one whispered. For the first time since the trial began, even the reporters froze, pens suspended above paper. It wasn't the words alone that silenced the courtroom. It was the weight behind them. The unshakable truth that bravery doesn't laugh and dignity doesn't smirk. And as Marcus sat straighter, chains clinking softly, the echo of Kincaid's cruel laughter died, swallowed whole by the record of a soldier who had always stood when it mattered most. The courtroom did not return to its earlier rhythm after the service record was read. Instead, it felt like every heartbeat in the room had slowed to match Marcus Cole's steady breathing. The chains on his wrists no longer seemed to define him. The words on those pages had painted him as more than a defendant. They had revealed him as a man shaped by sacrifice. The prosecutor shuffled his papers as though hoping to find some hidden line that could erase the silence, but the silence was heavier than his arguments, thicker than the walls themselves. He cleared his throat. "Sergeant Cole," he began again, his voice thinner now, "commendable as your record may be, this case is about the night you disobeyed." Aisha cut him off. "Objection. Counsel is attempting to diminish the relevance of what the jury has just heard." Judge Phelps lifted a hand. "Overruled. But keep to the facts, prosecutor." Marcus raised his head slowly, eyes steady. "May I speak?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. Marcus turned to the jury, his voice quiet but strong. "Every medal I was given, I didn't earn alone. Men and women bled beside me. Some never came home. I carry them every time I make a choice." His gaze dropped to his hands. "That night, when I saw a man bleeding out, I didn't hear 'halt.' I heard the same voice I've heard in every war zone. Save him before he's gone. That's who I am. That's who I was trained to be." A murmur stirred in the gallery. One man whispered, "Amen." Another, "That's a soldier." Kincaid shifted in his seat, face flushed. His earlier smirk had withered into a tight grimace. For the first time, he looked trapped, caught in a silence that wasn't his to break. The prosecutor tried to recover. "Ladies and gentlemen, remember, this is not a battlefield. This is a city street. We cannot have individuals choosing which orders to follow. That way lies chaos." But even as he spoke, his words felt brittle. The jury members glanced at each other, their expressions unreadable, but not unmoved. During recess, the hallway exploded with energy. Reporters dialed into their networks, phones pressed to their ears. Words like hero, service record, and Bronze Star floated through the air. Supporters clustered near the doors, shaking their heads in disbelief that Marcus was even on trial. Naomi, Marcus's younger sister, stood against the wall, arms folded tightly. She had listened to every word, her chest heavy with pride and fear. When Aisha walked out, Naomi rushed to her. "You finally told them," she said. "You let them see him." Aisha adjusted her glasses. "I didn't tell them anything. His record spoke for itself, but records don't guarantee verdicts. The system is stubborn." Naomi's eyes hardened. "So is my brother." Across the hall, Kincaid leaned against the vending machine, glaring. He could feel eyes on him, the same way he had felt in training exercises where Marcus had once been a quiet leader. The memory burned, how Marcus had been praised while he was overlooked. Rage flared in his chest. Now they see him as a hero again, even here. A reporter approached. "Officer Kincaid, care to comment on your connection to Sergeant Cole? The record shows you trained with him." Kincaid's jaw worked. "Connection?" He spat the word. "If training together made him a saint, then I guess we're all saints. Look around. Does he look like one?" His eyes flicked toward the courtroom doors. "He's in chains, that's what matters." But the reporter's eyebrow arched, unimpressed. "Chains can be unjust, officer. Sometimes they're just symbols of power, not guilt." The cameras caught Kincaid's scowl before he shoved past them. Back inside, when court resumed, the atmosphere was still electric. The jury returned, their faces tight with thought. Judge Phelps addressed them carefully. "You have heard the record. You must weigh it fairly, without prejudice, without bias. This courtroom is not a place for laughter or mockery. It is a place for truth." She cast a brief glance toward Kincaid, and the meaning was clear. The defense called their next witness, Captain Raymond Ellis, Marcus's former commanding officer. A tall, weathered man with silver streaking his temples, Ellis walked with the calm authority of someone who had seen too much and lost too many. "Captain," Aisha began, "did you serve with Sergeant Cole?" "I did. 3 tours." "And how would you describe his conduct under pressure?" Ellis's eyes locked on the jury. "He followed the mission, but he never forgot the people. Orders tell you where to stand. Cole always asked who needed carrying. That's not disobedience, that's leadership." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't shock. It was respect, quiet and unspoken, filling every corner of the courtroom. When recess came again, word had already spread beyond the courthouse. Social media lit up with hashtags. Service before self, Respect the soldier, Kittik had justice for Cole. News anchors outside called it a turning point in the trial. Naomi clutched her phone, scrolling through the waves of support. She turned to Marcus as the guards led him back to his seat. "They see you now," she whispered. Marcus gave her the faintest smile. "I just want them to see the truth." Behind them, Kincaid muttered under his breath, but no one listened. The silence of the courtroom had already buried his laughter, and in its place rose something he couldn't stop: respect for the man he had tried to mock. The third day of trial dawned gray and wet, rain streaking down the courthouse steps as if the city itself wanted to wash something clean. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, their cameras wrapped in plastic. Still, they didn't leave. Too much was at stake now. Inside, the courtroom was packed to the rafters. The service record had shifted the atmosphere. Where once there had been doubt, now there was curiosity, and even admiration. People wanted to see what would happen next. Sergeant Marcus Cole sat straighter than before, his wrists still cuffed but his bearing unbroken. Every motion reminded the gallery of who he had been before the charges, before the mockery. The prosecutor rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let's not be distracted by glittering commendations. This case is about a single night in this city, about an officer of the law issuing a direct command, and the defendant ignoring it. Lives depend on discipline, rules matter." He gestured toward the gallery, where Officer Brett Kincaid sat stiff, his jaw set. "We'll hear again from Officer Kincaid, whose order was disregarded." Aisha's eyes narrowed. She had expected this. Kincaid walked to the witness stand with a swagger, but the silence in the room muted it. He raised his hand for the oath, voice clipped. "Officer Kincaid," the prosecutor began, "what did you see the night in question?" Kincaid leaned into the microphone. "I saw Sergeant Cole ignore me. I told him to stop 3 times. He kept running with some man in his arms. That's obstruction. That's reckless. It endangered everyone around." "And what was your assessment of the man he carried?" Kincaid shrugged. "Couldn't even tell if he was hurt that bad. People fake things." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge rapped her gavel. Aisha stood. "Your Honor, permission to cross-examine." The judge nodded. She approached slowly, her heels clicking like measured beats. "Officer Kincaid, do you recall participating in a civilian evacuation drill with Sergeant Cole 2 years ago?" Kincaid hesitated. Maybe, a lot of drills." "Let me refresh your memory." She slid a photocopy of the training log onto the evidence table. "Your name is right here, alongside his. Do you deny it?" Kincaid's jaw twitched. "No." "In that drill, did Sergeant Cole disobey orders?" "No." "In fact, didn't he lead half the drill when your superior asked him to demonstrate proper procedure?" Kincaid shifted uncomfortably. "I don't remember." "You don't remember," Aisha repeated, letting the words hang. "Yet you remember every detail of that night on the street, including that the man in his arms might have been faking blood loss?" "I know what I saw," Kincaid snapped. Aisha leaned in, her voice cutting like glass. "What you saw was a man carrying someone in need. What you heard was your own resentment, and what you laughed at, officer, was not comedy. It was courage." The gallery erupted with murmurs again. The judge had to strike the gavel twice for silence. Kincaid's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. During recess, the hallway buzzed like a hive. Reporters rushed out to broadcast updates. "Cross-examination undercut prosecution witness," one tweeted. Another said, "Officer's credibility shaken by training record. Naomi found Aisha near the water fountain." "You shredded him," she whispered fiercely. Aisha adjusted her glasses. "I didn't need to. He did it to himself." Back inside, the defense called their next witness, Dr. Elena Morris, the EMT who had been on duty the night Marcus was arrested. A woman with calm hands and steady eyes, she spoke with clinical precision. "When I arrived, the man Sergeant Cole carried had lost over a liter of blood. If Sergeant Cole hadn't acted when he did, the man would have died on the pavement." The prosecutor tried to interject. "But procedure." Dr. Morris didn't waver. "Procedure didn't stop the bleeding. Sergeant Cole did." The words landed like stone. The jury shifted. Some leaned forward. Others glanced at Marcus, who sat still, but with a spark of life in his eyes that hadn't been there before. In the gallery, Kincaid sat rigid, staring at the floor. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by clenched teeth. He looked like a man losing not just a case, but control over the narrative he thought he owned. When court adjourned for the day, the rain had stopped. Outside, crowds gathered despite the wet pavement, chanting softly, "Respect the soldier, respect the truth." Reporters lit up their cameras, capturing the chant as it spread down the block. Naomi walked beside her brother as deputies escorted him. "They're with you now," she whispered. "The world sees you." Marcus looked at her, his voice quiet. "The world sees more than me. They see what laughter tried to bury. They see dignity." Behind them, Kincaid exited alone. No cameras followed. No chants rose. For the first time, he seemed small against the courthouse steps, a man whose laughter had turned into silence. By the fourth morning, the courthouse steps were crowded long before the doors opened. Students carried handmade signs: "Honor Service, Honor Truth." Veterans stood in crisp jackets, medals pinned to their chests, silent but resolute. News crews circled like hawks, their cameras capturing every handshake, every chant. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. The service record, the cross-examination of Kincaid, and the EMT's testimony had shifted the momentum. The jury's faces no longer looked blank, they looked engaged, weighed down by something real. Sergeant Marcus Cole sat straighter than ever. Though his wrists were still bound, his posture was no longer one of a man on trial, but of one who had remembered his own worth. The prosecution tried to reclaim the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, striding before the jury box, "you've heard stirring stories, seen impressive medals, but none of that changes what happened on one night in this city. A lawful order was ignored. That is the fact. You can drape it in honor if you like, but the law is the law." He gestured toward Marcus. "And the law doesn't bend for soldiers who think they know better." Marcus didn't flinch. Aisha rose smoothly. "Objection." Argumentative. The judge rapped her gavel. "Sustained. Counsel, stick to questions." The prosecutor pressed his lips tight and returned to his seat. Aisha stood, gathering her papers. "Your Honor, the defense calls Naomi Ellis to the stand." Marcus's sister rose, her black dress modest but her eyes sharp with fire. She took the oath, then faced the jury. "Ms. Ellis," Aisha began, "where were you the night your brother was arrested?" Naomi swallowed hard. "I was there, on the sidewalk. I saw everything." "And what did you see?" Naomi's voice trembled at first but grew stronger. "I saw my brother holding a man drenched in blood. I saw him call out for help. I saw Officer Kincaid shout for him to stop, but my brother didn't stop because that man's life was slipping away. He laid him down gently when the EMTs arrived, and then they put him in chains." The gallery stirred. "Did your brother resist?" "No, he lifted his hands. He said, 'Do what you have to, but don't let this man die.'" Naomi's eyes shimmered, her voice steady now. "That's not disobedience. That's who he is." The prosecutor rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Ellis, you're his sister. You'd say anything to protect him, wouldn't you?" Naomi didn't blink. "I don't have to say anything. The EMT already told you he saved that man's life. I'm just reminding you that he did it while being treated like a criminal." The prosecutor faltered. Aisha folded her arms, satisfied. When Naomi stepped down, the jury's eyes followed her, measuring her sincerity. Marcus gave her a small nod, pride and pain mingling in his gaze. The judge called a short recess. In the hallway, reporters swarmed Naomi instantly, microphones pushed toward her. "Ms. Ellis, do you believe this case is racially motivated? Do you think Officer Kincaid has a personal vendetta? What would your father say if he were here?" Naomi held her chin high. "My father served this country before Marcus. He taught us that service means sacrifice. If he were here, he'd say what my brother has said all along. Dignity matters, even when others laugh." Her words spread across every channel. Online, hashtags multiplied. Hashtag dignity matters, #justice for Cole. Meanwhile, Kincaid lurked in a corner of the hallway watching reporters chase Naomi. His fists clenched. Every word from her lips felt like a nail hammered deeper into his coffin. He muttered under his breath, "They'll forget him if I remind them who gives the orders." But even he could feel it. The tide was turning. His laughter had once echoed through the courtroom. Now it sounded hollow in his own head. Back inside, the defense called their final witness of the day, Colonel David Ruiz, Marcus's former commanding officer. A tall man with a commanding presence, Ruiz spoke with clipped precision. "Colonel," Aisha asked, "how long did you serve with Sergeant Cole?" 5 years, 3 combat zones. "And in those years, did he ever put his men at risk by ignoring orders?" Ruiz's eyes narrowed. Only if you define saving lives as ignoring orders. He didn't worship rules. He honored people. And frankly, if more soldiers had his instincts, fewer coffins would come home draped in flags. Gasps echoed. Even Judge Phelps's stern face softened a fraction. The prosecutor attempted to object. Speculative, but Ruiz cut him off. Speculative? It's on record. I buried those men. I wrote those letters to their families. And Sergeant Cole is one of the reasons I didn't have to write more. The gallery fell utterly silent. When the court adjourned, the atmosphere was electric. Supporters flooded the steps outside, chanting Marcus's name, chanting respect. Marcus was led out by deputies, but as he passed Naomi, he whispered, "Whatever happens, we already won something. They see us now." Naomi squeezed his arm. "They don't just see, they believe." Behind them, Kincaid slipped through a side exit. No cameras followed. No chance rose for him. He was a man fading into irrelevance, one laugh at a time. The courthouse on the fifth day felt less like a building of justice and more like the center of a storm. Protesters and supporters lined opposite sidewalks, their chants colliding in the damp morning air. Signs waved. Justice for Cole clashed with law above all. News anchors spoke into cameras, their voices tight with urgency. Inside, the courtroom was tense but hushed. The jury filed in, their faces drawn. They had heard testimony from medics, commanders, and family, but the weight of decision still lay heavy. Sergeant Marcus Cole sat straighter than ever, the blue fabric of his uniform pressed, his wrists still cuffed. His expression was steady, though his eyes flickered toward Naomi in the gallery. She gave him a small nod of strength. Judge Phelps adjusted her glasses. "We will continue with closing arguments tomorrow. Today, both sides may submit additional evidence and motions." The prosecutor rose quickly, papers in hand. "Your Honor, the state submits prior disciplinary notes from the defendant's military file." Aisha shot to her feet. "Objection? Those notes were dismissed from his official record years ago." "They show a pattern," the prosecutor argued. "No," Aisha's voice was sharp. "They show a man disciplined for saving lives when bureaucracy said wait, and every time his choices were vindicated. The Bronze Star didn't appear out of thin air." The judge's gavel cracked. "Enough, I'll review the submission in chambers. For now, proceed." In the gallery, Officer Brett Kincaid sat rigid, hands clasped, his earlier arrogance now simmering into resentment. His laughter had once been the loudest sound in the room. Now it was his silence. During recess, he slipped out into the hallway, cornered by a reporter. "Officer Kincaid, do you feel your testimony is being questioned unfairly?" Kincaid's jaw tightened. "Unfair? He disobeyed me. I gave a clear order and he ignored it. Doesn't matter what shiny medals he's got. In the end, he's dangerous." The reporter tilted her head. "Dangerous or disciplined?" Kincaid's nostrils flared. "You'll see." He shoved past, storming toward the stairwell. Back in the courtroom, Aisha gathered her notes, preparing to deliver a motion for dismissal. But she knew it was a long shot. "Your Honor," she began, "the defense moves to dismiss on the grounds that the state has failed to prove criminal intent. What Sergeant Cole did was not defiance, it was duty." The prosecutor countered immediately. "The state argues intent doesn't matter. Obedience does. Without obedience, there's no law." Judge Phelps leaned forward, eyes scanning both tables. The pause stretched long, every creak of the benches magnified. Finally, she spoke. "Motion denied. The jury will decide." Aisha expected it, but disappointment still weighed. She turned, catching Marcus's eye. He gave her a small, reassuring nod as though to say, "We knew it would be hard." That afternoon, the courthouse emptied into chaos. Crowds surged around the steps, cameras flashing, chants booming. Naomi exited first, microphones thrust in her face. "Ms. Ellis, how do you respond to the state calling your brother dangerous?" Her chin lifted. "My brother saved a man's life. If that's dangerous, then maybe we need more danger in this world." The quote spread instantly online, turned into headlines. "Family fires back. Saving lives isn't dangerous." Marcus was led out by deputies. Supporters reached for him, some pressing hands against his arms in solidarity. He said nothing, but his calm presence spoke louder than words. Across the street, Kincaid watched from the shadows, his fists clenching at the chants. To him, every cheer for Marcus felt like a knife. They think he's a hero. They'll forget who really wears the badge. But already, Kincaid could feel the truth creeping in. The crowd wasn't with him anymore. That evening, Naomi scrolled through social media feeds in her small apartment. Hashtags blazed. #Justice for Cole, #Dignity Matters, #Respect the Soldier. Videos from the courtroom had been edited into montages, Marcus's record being read, the EMT's testimony, Naomi's own words. She turned to Aisha, who sat at the table, still surrounded by papers. They see him now. They see who he is. Aisha sighed. The jury isn't the internet. Public opinion doesn't write verdicts. Naomi leaned forward. No, but it reminds them they're being watched. It reminds them that silence has consequences. Late that night, Marcus sat in his holding cell, the noise of the jail echoing faintly through the walls. He closed his eyes and breathed, just as he had done in war zones, slow, steady, controlled. He thought of the man whose life he had carried, the one who had bled out on the pavement but survived. He wondered if that man knew his rescuer was now fighting for his own life in court. He whispered to himself, "Service doesn't stop at the battlefield, it follows you home." And in the silence, those words felt truer than anything else. Back outside, Officer Kincaid sat in his cruiser at the edge of the lot, watching the courthouse under the glow of streetlights. His reflection in the windshield looked older, meaner, smaller than he remembered. He whispered, "They'll forget him. They have to." But in his gut, he knew the tide had already turned. The morning of closing arguments began with a line around the block. People came not just to watch, but to bear witness. Veterans stood at attention in the drizzle, their berets darkened by rain. College students held cardboard signs with bold marker strokes, "Truth on Trial." The courthouse was no longer just a legal arena. It was a stage for a country's conscience. Inside, tension stretched tight across the wood-paneled walls. The jury filed in, solemn, their faces pale with the weight of what they'd soon decide. The bailiff's voice rang out, sharp and steady. "All rise." Judge Phelps entered, her robe trailing like shadow, her gavel cracking once to begin. "Counsel," she said, "we will now hear closing statements." The prosecutor rose first. His voice was firm, but the room could hear the strain beneath it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about medals. It's not about past service or noble intentions. It's about one moment, one order ignored. Law and order exist because commands must be followed. Without that, chaos reigns. Sergeant Cole may be decorated, but he is not above the law. When he chose his own judgment over an officer's command, he endangered lives. You must find him guilty." He gestured sharply toward Marcus. "You've heard the testimony. You've seen the evidence. Sympathy is not justice. The law is justice." The silence after his words was thin, brittle. Then Aisha Grant rose. She adjusted her glasses, walked to the center of the room, and let the quiet linger before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, the state wants you to believe this case is simple. Order given, order ignored. But life is not that simple, and neither is justice. You heard the EMT. Without Sergeant Cole's actions, a man would be dead. You heard his commanding officers. He was trained to make decisions under fire, decisions that saved lives. You read his service record, twice decorated with the Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, a man who has carried others out of chaos more times than we can count." Her voice sharpened. "And what did Officer Kincaid bring you? Laughter, mockery, a grudge disguised as testimony. Even when the service record showed he once trained with Sergeant Cole, he minimized it. Why? Because truth threatened his pride." Aisha stepped closer to the jury box. "This case is not about defiance. It is about duty. Duty to life. Duty to compassion. And yes, duty to justice. The justice you hold in your hands right now. If you convict him, you do not uphold the law. You betray the very spirit of it." She paused, letting her words settle like stones in water. "Find him not guilty." The gallery was hushed. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. The judge dismissed the jury for deliberation. They filed out, their faces drawn and grave. The moment the door closed, the gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters bolted for the exits to broadcast live updates. Supporters bowed their heads, some praying, others simply waiting. Marcus sat still, breathing slowly. Naomi leaned forward from the front row, whispering, "No matter what they decide, you've already won in here." She touched her chest. "They saw you." Marcus nodded faintly. "I just hope they see truth." Hours later, the jury remained out. The courthouse steps swelled with tension. Cameras flashed. Social media feeds exploded with speculation. Deliberation stretches into night. Jurors divided? Inside, Officer Kincaid paced in the empty hallway. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling bitter around him. He muttered, "They're all blinded. Medals and speeches, that's all it takes." He crushed the cigarette beneath his boot and whispered to himself, "If they let him walk, it's the end of order, the end of respect for the badge." But even he knew, the chants outside weren't for him. They never had been. As the evening stretched, Judge Phelps recalled the jury to ask if progress was being made. "We are deliberating in good faith, Your Honor," the foreperson said, voice heavy. "We require more time." She nodded and recessed for the night. The gallery spilled out into the wet streets where candles flickered to life. Veterans held them high. Students sang softly. The chant rose again, rhythmic and unyielding. "Respect the soldier, respect the truth." Back in his holding cell, Marcus closed his eyes and thought of the battlefield. He remembered crawling through sand and smoke, carrying bodies heavier than his own strength. He remembered hearing bullets snap overhead and still pressing forward. This silence, this waiting, it felt the same. It felt like the pause before dawn. He whispered, "Whatever they decide, I will stand." In a dim corner of the courthouse parking lot, Kincaid sat in his cruiser, headlights off. His reflection in the glass was tired, warped. He muttered, "If the jury won't make him guilty, the world will forget what guilty means." But as chants of respect carried through the night, even he could feel it. The tide had moved, and he was stranded on the wrong side. Morning came with heavy skies. By the time the courthouse opened, the plaza outside was already flooded with people. Veterans in pressed jackets lined the steps, their medals catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Students carried banners painted overnight, "Service is not a crime," and "Respect the soldier." News anchors spoke with voices pitched high, sensing history in the making. Inside, the jury returned to their room. 12 men and women carried the burden of the nation's eyes. They sat around a long oak table, faces pale with fatigue. Some tapped pens nervously, others stared at their hands. The foreperson cleared his throat. "We've heard everything. We've read the record. We've seen the witnesses. The question is, did Sergeant Cole break the law, or did he fulfill it?" A woman in her 40s shook her head. "He broke the officer's command. That's the law, plain and simple." A younger juror leaned forward. "But if he hadn't, that man would have died. Isn't the point of law to protect life? He was serving the spirit, not just the letter." Voices overlapped, rising and falling, arguments weaving like tangled threads. Hours passed, the weight of decision growing heavier with every minute. In the gallery, Marcus's family waited anxiously. Naomi clutched her phone, scrolling through the flood of support online. Hashtags trended worldwide. #Justice for Cole. #Respect the soldier. #Dignity matters. Videos of the trial had gone viral, viewed millions of times. Aisha sat quietly beside her, eyes closed, rehearsing potential appeals if the verdict went wrong. She knew how unpredictable juries could be, how prejudice could tip the scales even against overwhelming evidence. Marcus himself sat in chains, but his back was straight, his breathing was steady. He looked more like a soldier awaiting orders than a man awaiting judgment. Officer Brett Kincaid, however, was unraveling. He stood in a shadowed corner of the courthouse hallway, watching supporters stream in and out. Every chant of respect felt like an insult. Every headline about Marcus felt like a dagger. 2 officers walked past him, whispering, "Hard to believe, huh? Guy saved lives and they locked him up. Doesn't sit right." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "You don't know the whole story," he muttered. But they didn't even turn to answer. Their voices faded down the corridor, leaving him alone with his bitterness. Back in deliberation, the jury was split. 6 leaned toward conviction, 6 toward acquittal. The foreperson rubbed his temples. "We can't go on like this. Let's take it piece by piece. Did Cole disobey? Yes. Was it malicious? No. Was a life saved? Yes. Does saving a life excuse disobedience?" Silence. Heavy. Finally, an elderly juror spoke. "When I was young, my father told me rules keep us safe, but he also told me there'd be times when following a rule blindly would break a person's soul. This feels like one of those times." The words lingered. In the plaza outside, the crowd swelled larger. Candles flickered even in daylight, tiny flames held stubbornly against the drizzle. A veteran lifted a sign reading, "We stood with him overseas, we stand with him now." Reporters buzzed with updates. Jury deadlocked? Decision imminent? Inside, Naomi's hands trembled. She whispered to Aisha, "What if they don't see it? What if they still convict him?" Aisha placed a hand on hers. "Then we fight again. But I think they're starting to see." The record speaks louder than prejudice. Marcus was escorted back to his holding cell for the night. Alone, he sat on the steel cot, eyes fixed on the gray wall. He thought of the man he'd carried, bleeding in his arms. He wondered if that man was alive somewhere, holding his family, grateful for another day. Marcus whispered, "If saving him was my crime, I'll bear it." He closed his eyes, breathing slow. The storm could rage outside. He had weathered worse. Meanwhile, Kincaid sat in his cruiser in the dark parking lot, headlights off. His reflection in the windshield looked twisted, older. He muttered, "If they acquit him, the badge means nothing." His fists clenched around the wheel. "They'll think soldiers get to make the rules." But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't about soldiers or rules anymore. It was about respect, and respect was slipping through his fingers. Back in the jury room, the four-person took another vote. This time, the balance had shifted. 7 for acquittal, 5 for conviction. The tide was turning. When the court recessed for the night, the crowd outside did not leave. They camped on the steps, chanting in waves, holding candles that refused to die in the rain. Naomi stood among them, her voice hoarse but steady as she led the chant. "Respect the soldier, respect the truth." The sound rolled through the night, past the courthouse, past the city, carried into every home watching. Inside his cell, Marcus heard faint echoes through the concrete walls. A small smile crossed his face. For the first time since his arrest, he believed he might actually walk free. The second day of deliberation began with heavy air. Rain clouds pressed low over the city, and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Yet the courthouse plaza was already packed by sunrise. People brought folding chairs, thermoses of coffee, even blankets. Some veterans unfurled American flags and held them steady against the wind. College students painted slogans on cardboard. "Justice has a uniform too, and respect isn't defiance." Inside, the jury assembled once more around their long oak table. Their faces looked more worn, their eyes rimmed red. The weight of the nation seemed to press on their shoulders. The four-person spoke first. "We ended yesterday at 7 for acquittal, 5 for conviction. We need to move forward." A younger juror leaned forward. "We all agree Sergeant Cole disobeyed an order, but we can't ignore why. That man survived because of him." Another juror countered, "Intent doesn't erase disobedience. The badge has to mean something." "But what about the medals?" someone asked. "The EMT? His commanding officers?" The room broke into voices, overlapping, arguments circling. Back and forth, law against life, obedience against conscience. Hours passed with no resolution. In the gallery, Marcus's family waited anxiously. Naomi clutched her phone, scrolling through live updates from reporters. Social media lit up with speculation. Jury deadlocked? Acquittal likely? Aisha, seated beside her, remained still. Her legal pad was filled with notes, but her eyes were fixed on the closed jury door. She had seen this tension before, in other cases where truth and prejudice collided. The outcome was never guaranteed. Marcus sat at the defense table, posture straight, breathing slow. He looked like a soldier on watch, waiting for dawn. Officer Brett Kincaid was unraveling. He sat in the back of the gallery, arms crossed, eyes burning into the back of Marcus's head. His smirk was gone. In its place was a thin, bitter line. During recess, a reporter approached him. "Officer Kincaid, do you think the jury is being swayed by Sergeant Cole's military record?" Kincaid's voice was sharp. "Swayed? Manipulated, more like. He broke the law. End of story. All this talk about medals, it's smoke and mirrors. You can't let soldiers decide when orders matter." The reporter raised an eyebrow. "And yet the man he carried lived. Do you believe letting him die would have been justice?" Kincaid hesitated, anger tightening his jaw. "Justice is the law, not feelings." The reporter left, unimpressed. Kincaid cursed under his breath. For the first time, he felt not like a witness, but like a man standing on sand while the tide rushed in. Back in the jury room, the debate reached a breaking point. An elderly juror slammed his hand on the table. "We're missing the point. The law isn't supposed to punish compassion, it's supposed to protect it." Another shook her head. "But if we excuse this, what's to stop others from ignoring commands whenever it suits them?" The four-person sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Maybe the difference is intent. Rules exist for order. But rules without humanity become chains. The room fell silent. Outside, the plaza was swelling. Supporters led chants, their voices rising into the gray sky. "Respect the soldier! Respect the truth!" Opponents shouted back, but they were fewer now, drowned beneath the roar. News cameras captured every second, broadcasting it live across the country. Naomi stood at the top of the steps, leading the chant, her voice hoarse but fierce. People held candles even though it was daylight, tiny flames flickering against the gloom. In his holding cell, Marcus sat alone. The faint echo of chants seeped through the concrete walls. He closed his eyes, hearing them not as noise but as a rhythm, steady, unyielding. He thought of battlefields, of carrying bodies heavier than his own strength, of whispers to stay alive just a little longer. He whispered, "If this is my last fight, I'll fight it standing." Late in the afternoon, the jury knocked. The message spread instantly through the courthouse. They had reached a decision. The gallery filled in seconds. Reporters rushed back to their seats, pens poised. Naomi gripped Aisha's hand until her knuckles whitened. Kincaid leaned forward in his chair, eyes wide, desperate. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Phelps entered, solemn. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood. "We have, Your Honor." He handed over the slip of paper. The judge read it silently, her face a mask. Then she nodded. "Please announce your decision." The courtroom held its breath. And outside, thousands of people fell silent all at once, waiting for the word that would decide not just one man's fate, but the meaning of dignity itself. The air in the courtroom was electric. Every person sat rigid in their seat, breaths shallow, eyes fixed on the foreperson. Even the ceiling fans seemed to pause, their hum fading into the weight of anticipation. Judge Phelps adjusted her glasses. "You may read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded the slip of paper, hands trembling slightly. His voice, though quiet, carried through the room. "In the matter of the state versus Sergeant Marcus D. Cole, on the charge of disobeying a lawful order," he paused, glancing at the jury, then back at the paper. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." For a heartbeat, silence. Pure, absolute silence. Then the gallery erupted. Gasps, shouts, sobs of relief filled the chamber. Veterans in uniform saluted from their seats. Naomi cried out, hands covering her face, before collapsing into Aisha's embrace. The judge slammed her gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But even her stern voice could not erase the surge of emotion flowing through the room. Marcus sat motionless for a moment, as if his body hadn't yet caught up to his ears. Then slowly, he exhaled. His shoulders loosened, his eyes lifted to the ceiling, and a faint, tired smile broke across his face. Outside, the verdict spread like wildfire. Crowds on the courthouse steps erupted in cheers. Chants of "Respect! Respect!" rolled like thunder. Flags waved, candles flared higher, and strangers embraced in relief. Reporters shouted into cameras, "Not guilty! The jury has acquitted Sergeant Cole!" The plaza shook with joy. Yet on the far edge, the small group of opponents stood stunned, their voices drowned out entirely by the roar of approval. Back inside, Naomi rushed forward. "Marcus!" she cried, reaching through the rail as deputies unlocked his cuffs. "You're free!" Marcus stood, the weight of weeks sliding off him like an old coat. He embraced his sister, his arms strong though his body trembled. "I told you," he whispered, "truth stands." Aisha smiled, her glasses catching the light. "You were never just my client, Marcus. You became the reminder of what this courtroom is supposed to mean." Judge Phelps looked down at him, her expression softer now. "Sergeant Cole, you are released," but not everyone shared the joy. In the gallery's back row, Officer Brett Kincaid sat frozen, his face pale, his jaw clenched. He had imagined this moment differently, imagined the gavel falling in his favor, imagined Marcus being led away in chains. Instead, the world had turned against him. He rose abruptly, storming toward the exit. Reporters noticed, cameras swiveling, microphones shoved his way. "Officer Kincaid, do you have a comment on the verdict?" Kincaid's voice was sharp, venomous. "This jury just undermined the badge. They've told every soldier out there they can ignore the law if they feel like it. You'll regret this." Boos erupted from the crowd, drowning him out. Kincaid shoved past, but the cameras followed. His bitterness was no longer hidden. It was on full display, broadcast for millions to see. Back on the courthouse steps, Marcus emerged into the roar of cheers. Supporters surged forward, chanting his name. Veterans saluted. Strangers reached out, some just to touch his arm as though contact alone carried the dignity he embodied. Marcus raised his hands, not in victory, but in calm. His voice carried over the crowd, steady and firm. This is not about me. This is about truth, about dignity, about knowing that sometimes standing for life means standing against laughter and hate. The crowd roared louder, the chant uniting into one. Respect! Respect! Naomi stood beside him, tears streaming, her hand gripping his. You did it, she whispered. No, Marcus said softly. We did it. Later that night, the courthouse plaza remained lit with candles. Songs filled the air, hymns of hope and justice. Reporters filed their final stories. Verdict of respect. Soldier acquitted. Crowd erupts in cheers. Inside his apartment across town, Kincaid sat in darkness. The TV blared images of Marcus embraced by crowds, headlines hailing him as a symbol. Kincaid's fists clenched. His laughter, once so loud in the courtroom, was gone now, swallowed by silence, by the truth that the world had moved without him. He muttered bitterly, "They'll regret this." But his voice trembled, empty even to his own ears. In his sister's small apartment, Marcus finally sat at a kitchen table free of chains. Naomi placed a mug of coffee in front of him, her hands still shaking. "You know you're not just free, right?" she said. "You're history now." Marcus shook his head. "History is written later. Tonight, I just want peace." He lifted the mug, breathing in its warmth. His hands no longer trembled. Across the city, chants of respect still echoed, drifting through streets like a verdict that belonged to everyone. And for the first time since that cruel laugh cut through the courtroom, silence carried not bitterness, but justice. By dawn the next morning, the courthouse plaza looked like a festival ground. Candles still flickered in wax puddles, flags waved from lampposts, and the chant of respect lingered in the air like an echo that refused to die. News vans were still parked along the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Headlines rolled across screens everywhere. Soldier acquitted. Verdict sparks national conversation. Respect becomes rallying cry. Marcus Cole hadn't slept. He sat at Naomi's kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from his coffee. Freedom felt heavy. For weeks he had been chained, fighting to be heard. Now the world was shouting his name, turning him into something larger than a man. Naomi slid into the chair opposite him, her eyes bloodshot but determined. "The phones won't stop ringing," she said. "Reporters, veterans groups, even a senator's office called. They all want you to speak." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not a politician. I didn't fight to stand at podiums. I just did what needed to be done." Naomi leaned forward. "That's why they want to hear you, because you're not chasing it. You lived it." Meanwhile, across town, Officer Brett Kincaid sat in his dark apartment, the glow of the television flickering across his face. Every channel replayed the same images. Marcus walking free, crowds cheering, veterans saluting. Kincaid's jaw clenched. He gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles whitened. "They turned him into a hero," he muttered, "and they turned me into the villain." He flipped the channel, but every station carried the same story. His bitter laugh escaped, hollow now. "Respect," he sneered. "Respect for a man who ignored the law." But deep down, even he knew it. The laughter that once filled the courtroom had been buried under a verdict that silenced him more effectively than any gavel. Later that morning, Marcus and Naomi stepped outside. Neighbors gathered instantly, cheering, hugging, thanking him. An elderly veteran pressed Marcus's hand, whispering, "You carried us yesterday, son. Don't stop now." Naomi whispered back, "See, you've become a symbol whether you like it or not." Marcus exhaled, looking at the crowd. Symbols can be dangerous. People forget the flaws. They forget the man behind it. But they also remember the dignity, Naomi said. And dignity lasts longer than medals. By noon, Marcus and Aisha stood before a row of microphones on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. "Sergeant Cole, do you feel vindicated? What message do you have for officers like Kincaid? Do you plan to lead this new respect movement?" Marcus raised his hands, quieting the noise. His voice was calm, steady. "I didn't walk into that courtroom to start a movement. I walked in chained, accused of forgetting the law. What I hope you all saw is that the law isn't just words on paper, it's people, it's lives. That night, a man would have died if I had stood still. I couldn't do that. I won't apologize for it." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. And it's earned when we choose compassion over pride. The crowd erupted in cheers. Hashtags lit up online. Hashtag compassion over pride, hashtag respect is earned. Aisha leaned toward him afterward. You just gave them more than a headline. You gave them a cause. Marcus shook his head gently. Causes belong to the people. Mine was just a choice. That night, candlelight vigils spread across cities nationwide. Veterans, students, families, they all gathered in town squares, holding photos of Marcus alongside the word respect. News anchors called it a cultural turning point. In his cell-like apartment, Kincaid watched the coverage with seething rage. His phone buzzed with missed calls, department inquiries, disciplinary hearings looming. He ignored them all. The laughter that once defined him now mocked him. They'll forget him, he whispered to the empty room. They have to. But his voice trembled, and even he didn't believe it. At Naomi's apartment, Marcus finally allowed himself a quiet moment. He sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Naomi brought him a blanket. You carried them through the storm, she said softly. Now they're carrying you. Marcus pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Then I hope they carry the truth, not me, because men fade, but truth should stand. Naomi smiled faintly. It already is. And across the city, chants still echoed faintly into the night. Respect, respect. Not shouted in anger, but spoken like a prayer. Steady, enduring, unbreakable. By the following week, Marcus Cole's name was on every newsfeed. Clips of the trial replayed endlessly. His calm face as his service record was read, his steady words about dignity, the jury's announcement of not guilty. To some, he was a hero. To others, he was proof the system bent too easily. Either way, the nation was talking. In Atlanta, the courthouse plaza had become a gathering place even though the trial was over. Crowds still brought candles, chanting respect, as though the word itself had taken root in the pavement. Naomi tried to shield her brother from the frenzy, but it was impossible. Every time Marcus stepped outside, microphones and cameras appeared. Reporters peppered him with questions. Sergeant Cole, what do you say to families who lost loved ones because orders weren't followed? Do you think your case sets a precedent for disobedience? Are you prepared to lead the respect movement now forming nationwide? Marcus always answered the same way. Calm, measured, grounded. I didn't seek this. I only acted in the moment to save a life. If people see dignity in that, let them carry it forward. I am just one man. His humility only fueled the story. Meanwhile, Brett Kincaid sat before an internal affairs board at the police department. 3 captains and a civilian oversight officer faced him across a long table. Files sat stacked between them. Disciplinary notes, footage of the trial, transcripts of his mocking laughter. One captain leaned forward. Officer Kincaid, do you deny laughing during Sergeant Cole's testimony? Kincaid's fists tightened. He was playing the hero. Someone had to cut through the act. The civilian oversight officer frowned. Cutting through an act is not your duty in court. Upholding respect for proceedings is. Your behavior embarrassed this department. Kincaid's face reddened. So you'll throw me under the bus because some soldier has medals? The room went silent. Finally, another captain spoke flatly. This isn't about medals. It's about dignity, and you lost yours. Kincaid realized then what he had feared all along. He wasn't just losing a case. He was losing his badge. At Naomi's apartment, Marcus and Aisha sat with steaming mugs of coffee. Stacks of letters spread across the table. They came from everywhere. Families thanking him, veterans saluting him, children sending drawings of soldiers carrying civilians. Naomi picked one up, her voice catching. This boy wrote, I want to be like you because you help people even when it's hard. She held it out. They're seeing you as more than a man, Marcus. You've become a mirror for what they want to believe in. Marcus sighed, staring at the handwriting. I don't want to be anyone's mirror. People should believe in themselves, not in me. Aisha sipped her coffee. That's exactly why they do. Because you don't chase it. That afternoon, Marcus agreed, reluctantly, to address a gathering outside the courthouse. Thousands had gathered, candles already glowing in the dusk. Naomi walked beside him, her hand on his arm. When he stepped up to the microphone, the plaza fell silent. Cameras streamed live. I was put on trial for saving a life, Marcus began. His voice carried steady, deep. Some said I disobeyed. Maybe I did. But if obedience means letting a man die, then I chose differently. I chose humanity. The crowd cheered, but he raised his hand for quiet. I am no saint. I am no leader. I am a soldier who made a choice. If that choice inspires you, let it be this. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. Every time we choose compassion over pride. The chant rose again, booming, unified. Respect! Respect! Marcus stepped back, his expression solemn. Naomi leaned close. You gave them what they needed, Marcus whispered, but who gives me what I need? She squeezed his hand. Peace will come, just hold on. That night, Kincaid sat in his darkened apartment, a letter from the department in his lap. Suspension pending termination. His badge lay on the table beside him, dull under the lamplight. On the TV, footage of Marcus's speech played, the chant echoing. Kincaid's laugh burst out again, but it was hollow, cracked. Respect, he spat. They worship him like he's the law itself. But when the laugh died, silence filled the room, and for the first time, Kincaid felt the weight of being forgotten. Back at Naomi's, Marcus finally allowed himself to rest. He sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. He whispered into the night, I carried one man. Now I feel like I'm carrying all of them. Naomi joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. You're not carrying them. They're carrying you. That's what respect really means. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the words settle. For the first time, he felt a flicker of peace. Within a week, the story of Marcus Cole had outgrown Atlanta. Vigils spread to Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles. Crowds filled city squares, holding candles and signs with one word written in bold black ink, respect. News anchors called it a grassroots wave. Commentators debated if it was a movement or just a moment, but the people chanting didn't care about labels. They felt something shift in their bones. Marcus, however, struggled to adjust. Each day, Naomi's phone buzzed nonstop with requests, television interviews, speeches, even an invitation to Washington. Marcus kept refusing. I didn't survive battlefields to stand on stages, he said one night, sitting at Naomi's table. I don't want to be anyone's headline, I just want to breathe. Naomi pressed her hand over his. You may not want it, but the world already decided. You're their symbol now. Aisha leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses. Symbols are powerful, Marcus. They can change laws, shift public opinion, but they also attract enemies. Marcus's eyes darkened. Like Kincaid. Across town, Brett Kincaid sat in a bar nursing his fourth drink, his badge already stripped, his future crumbling. On the TV above the counter, footage played of Marcus addressing the crowd outside the courthouse. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Marcus's voice echoed. The patrons clapped, raising glasses. Kincaid slammed his fist on the counter. You all think he's some saint. He's not. He broke the law. A man down the bar snorted. He saved a life, buddy. You mocked him. That's why you're done. Laughter followed. But this time it wasn't Kincaid's. He shoved back from the bar, his face burning. Out on the street, the cold air hit his skin. He muttered, They took everything from me and gave it to him. For the first time, the bitterness twisted into something darker, a need to strike back. Meanwhile, Marcus walked through the plaza at dusk. The crowd swelled again, candles glowing like fireflies. Veterans saluted as he passed. Children waved flags. One young boy tugged at his sleeve. Mr. Cole, my dad says you're a hero. Marcus knelt, looking him in the eye. I'm just a man who made a choice. Someday, you'll make your own choices. Be sure they're for good. The boy nodded solemnly, as if receiving orders. Reporters captured the moment, the image splashing across front pages the next morning. From soldier to symbol, Cole inspires a generation. That night, Naomi scrolled through social media, her eyes wide. Marcus, do you realize what's happening? Hashtags are trending in 20 countries. People are holding vigils overseas. You've gone global. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I never wanted this. But maybe it wanted you, Naomi whispered. At the same time, Aisha received a call from a congressman's office. She relayed it at dinner. They want Marcus to testify at a hearing on justice reform. His case has become an example nationwide. Marcus shook his head. I'm not a politician. But you're living proof, Aisha insisted. You didn't ask for it, but you can use it. You can make sure no one else sits in chains for saving a life. Marcus looked down at his hands. They were scarred, steady, hands that had carried too many bodies. If I do this, it won't be for them, he said quietly. It'll be for the ones who can't speak anymore. Across town, Kincaid watched the same coverage, rage gnawing at him. His phone buzzed with another message from Internal Affairs. Termination effective immediately. He hurled the phone against the wall, shattering it. In the silence that followed, he heard faint echoes outside, neighbors chanting along with the broadcast of the vigil. Respect! Respect! The sound crawled under his skin, louder than any laugh he had ever made. He whispered, "If respect is earned, then I'll take it back my way." Back at Naomi's, Marcus stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights. Naomi joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You okay?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded slowly. "I carried one man that night. Now I feel like I'm carrying thousands. It's heavy." Naomi squeezed his arm. "Then let us carry you. That's what this movement is. It's not just you anymore. It's all of us." Marcus closed his eyes, breathing deep. For the first time, he allowed himself to lean just a little into the support around him. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Storm clouds gathered over the city. The crowd in the plaza didn't disperse. They lifted their candles higher, chanting louder, determined to keep the flame alive. And in the shadows of his small apartment, Brett Kincaid listened, his bitterness solidifying into resolve. The trial had ended, but the battle for what came next had only begun. By the following week, Marcus Cole's name had left the headlines of local papers and landed squarely on the front page of national dailies. Editorials called him the courtroom soldier, and late-night hosts quoted his line, "Respect isn't demanded, it's earned." The phrase had become a mantra. It was printed on shirts, painted on signs, and even graffitied on alley walls. Marcus hated it. He sat at Naomi's kitchen table, his coffee untouched, while letters and requests piled higher than the stack of service medals he had once kept hidden in a drawer. Senators wanted him to testify. Activists wanted him to march. News networks wanted exclusives. Naomi leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "You can't ignore this forever, Marcus. The respect movement is real. They're asking for you." Marcus rubbed his temples. "They don't need me, they need the truth. And truth shouldn't depend on one man." Aisha, seated across from him, adjusted her glasses. "You may not want the spotlight, but it's already here. If you don't step into it, someone else will. Maybe someone with less integrity." Marcus met her gaze, weary. "I spent my life carrying others. I don't want to be carried as a banner." But deep down, he knew she was right. Across town, Brett Kincaid nursed his bitterness like an open wound. Termination papers sat crumpled on his kitchen table. His badge, once his pride, now lay discarded in a drawer. The television replayed footage of Marcus speaking to the crowd. Kincaid's reflection in the screen looked gaunt, hollow-eyed. "He took everything from me," Kincaid muttered. "Respect, trust, the badge. They'll forget me, but they'll remember him." He hurled an empty bottle across the room, the glass shattering against the wall. For the first time, his anger felt less like frustration and more like a plan forming in the shadows. Meanwhile, Naomi convinced Marcus to meet with a group of veterans outside the courthouse. The plaza was still alive every evening, candles glowing, chants rising. As Marcus stepped onto the steps, the crowd quieted instantly. Dozens of veterans stood at attention, their uniforms faded, but their salutes crisp. One older man, his cane trembling in his hand, spoke up. "Sergeant Cole, you carried us out there. Now we're here to carry you. We've seen leaders rise and fall, but respect, that word you gave us, hasn't felt this real in years." Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, many lined with scars the world couldn't see. His chest tightened. "I didn't choose this," he said softly, "but if standing here means reminding people that dignity matters, then I'll stand. Not as a leader, but as a witness." The crowd erupted, the chant booming once more. "Respect! Respect!" News of the gathering spread instantly. Overnight, videos of Marcus's words reached millions online. Hashtags blazed again. #witness not leader, #respect movement. In Washington, lawmakers took notice. Calls flooded Aisha's phone, demanding Marcus appear before a congressional committee. "They want him next week," she told Naomi grimly. "They see him as a voice they can't ignore." Naomi placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Maybe this is your mission now, not war, not chains, but truth." Marcus sighed heavily. "If I go, it won't be for politics. It'll be for those who can't speak for themselves." Back in his apartment, Kincaid saw the same footage. The crowd chanting, Marcus's words spreading like wildfire. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "They made him untouchable," he muttered. "A saint. And me, a ghost." He exhaled smoke, whispering to himself, "If the system won't silence him, maybe I'll have to." It was the first time the thought crystallized fully, and once it did, it refused to leave. The next morning, Naomi and Marcus walked together down the courthouse steps, where reporters waited. "Sergeant Cole, will you testify before Congress? Do you plan to lead the respect movement? Are you afraid of backlash?" Marcus paused, raising his hands. "I'll speak if it means reminding people that respect is not a slogan. It's a choice we make, every day in every action. That's all I have to give." The crowd applauded, but Naomi caught the flicker of unease in her brother's eyes. He was walking into something bigger than himself, and he knew it. That night, as the chants of respect echoed once more through the city, Marcus sat quietly on the balcony, staring at the stars. Naomi joined him. "You carried a wounded man once. Now you're carrying a country's hope." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Hope is heavier than any man I ever lifted." She placed her head on his shoulder. "Then let us carry it with you." For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to close his eyes. Not in surrender, but in trust. Across town, Brett Kincaid's apartment glowed dim under a single bulb. He sat at his table, scribbling on scraps of paper, muttering plans under his breath. His laughter returned. But it was quieter now, more dangerous. The trial was over. The verdict had been read, but in Kincaid's mind, the war had only begun. The summons arrived in the morning mail, delivered by courier in a sealed envelope bearing the seal of the United States Congress. Marcus stared at it for a long time before breaking the wax. "You are hereby requested to testify before the House Committee on Justice and Civil Rights." He read the lines twice, then set the letter down on Naomi's kitchen table. Naomi's eyes widened. "It's official. They want you in Washington." Marcus rubbed his temples. "They don't want me. They want the story. They want to use me." Aisha, already scrolling through her phone, shook her head. "They can want whatever they want. What matters is what you say. This is your chance to put respect into the record books, not just the streets." Marcus leaned back, his eyes weary. "I never wanted to be in record books." Naomi placed a hand over his. "You didn't want the trial either, but you stood through it. This is just another battlefield, Marcus. Different weapons, same stakes." Outside the courthouse that evening, the plaza was alive again. Thousands gathered with candles and banners. Some signs bore Marcus's face, though he winced whenever he saw them. To him, symbols felt dangerous, too easy to twist. Still, when he stepped out to speak, the chants died instantly. His presence commanded silence without effort. "I've been asked to speak in Washington," Marcus told them, his voice echoing. "I didn't ask for it, I didn't want it. But maybe it's not about what I want. Maybe it's about what we all need. To remember that dignity is stronger than laughter, that respect is stronger than hate." The crowd roared. The chant rolled again. "Respect! Respect!" Marcus stepped back, expression heavy. Naomi squeezed his hand. "They need you to go." Across the city, Brett Kincaid sat in his dark apartment, the TV glowing with coverage of Marcus's announcement. His termination papers lay unopened on the counter. "They'll put him in Washington now," he muttered. "They'll turn him into a lawmaker's puppet. And me? They buried me alive." He poured himself another drink, hands trembling. His eyes burned with rage as the chant on TV filled the room. "Respect! Respect!" His bitter laugh returned, but it cracked halfway through. "Respect! I'll show them what happens when they forget who keeps order." He picked up his discarded badge from the drawer, staring at its dull shine. The reflection staring back wasn't an officer anymore. It was a man unraveling. The next day, Marcus met with Aisha to prepare. She spread documents across the table, statistics, legal precedents, testimonies from families. "They'll ask you about procedure," she explained. "They'll try to corner you into saying disobedience is acceptable." Marcus shook his head. "I won't let them twist it. I'll tell the truth. That I didn't disobey for pride. I acted to save a life." Aisha studied him. "You realize this hearing could define national policy. You're stepping into history." Marcus's jaw tightened. "History can have me if it wants, but I'll stand the same way I did in that courtroom. Calm, dignified, true." That evening, Naomi scrolled through endless messages of support. Veterans offered to travel to D.C. to stand outside the Capitol. Students organized marches. Hashtags blazed. #Congress, #respect movement, #dignity, in law. She turned to Marcus. You've already become bigger than one verdict. This is about changing the system. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then let's hope the system is ready. Meanwhile, Kincaid's bitterness hardened into resolve. He spent hours scribbling in a notebook, mapping routes, marking dates. His laughter echoed off the walls, but it was quieter now, edged with menace. They think Washington will save him, he muttered. But I still have a voice. I'll remind them the badge is stronger than their chants. He pressed the cold metal of his badge against the page, leaving an imprint. This isn't over. The night before Marcus's trip, the plaza swelled larger than ever. Thousands gathered, candles lighting the sky like stars. Veterans led the chant, their voices booming, "Respect! Respect!" Marcus stepped onto the steps one last time before leaving. "Tomorrow I go to Washington," he said. "I go not for myself, but for every person who has been silenced by laughter, mocked for compassion, punished for dignity. I go because truth deserves a voice." The crowd roared, the chant rising into the night. Naomi stood beside him, tears shining in her eyes. "You're ready, Marcus." He looked out at the sea of faces, their candles flickering like a promise. "No," he whispered. "We're ready." Across the city, Brett Kincaid sat in his car, parked near the courthouse, watching the glow of the candles from a distance. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The chants carried through the night air, taunting him. "Respect! Respect!" He whispered through clenched teeth. "They'll respect me again, one way or another." The engine revved, but he didn't drive. He just sat there, staring at the glow, the sound of chants pounding like drums in his ears. The trial was over, but the battle had only just begun. The plane touched down in Washington just after dawn. From his window seat, Marcus Cole watched the Capitol dome glisten in the early light. It looked less like a building and more like a challenge. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his posture, and whispered to himself, calm, dignified, true. Naomi met him at baggage claim with Aisha by her side. Both looked tense but determined. "They've scheduled you for noon," Aisha said, already scrolling through her phone. "The Committee on Justice and Civil Rights, televised nationwide." Marcus nodded, his face unreadable. "And outside?" Naomi managed a small smile. "They're already there. Thousands. Veterans, students, families. They've come from every state. The respect movement's on the Capitol steps." Marcus sighed. "I didn't ask for this." Aisha's gaze softened. "Sometimes history asks for you." By mid-morning, the plaza outside the Capitol was alive. Flags waved, chants of respect echoed between marble columns. Veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with teenagers in hoodies, candles in hand despite the daylight. The crowd stretched for blocks, peaceful but powerful. Marcus emerged onto the steps, flanked by Naomi and Aisha. The roar shook the air. Reporters shoved microphones forward, flashes erupted, the chant grew louder. He raised his hands and silence fell like a curtain. "I came here to speak truth," Marcus said, his voice deep and steady. "Not to lead a movement, not to chase power, but to remind us all that respect is not demanded, it is earned. And it is earned when we choose compassion, even when pride tempts us otherwise." The crowd erupted again, the chant rolling like thunder. "Respect! Respect!" Inside, the hearing room buzzed with tension. Lawmakers filled the dais, cameras pointed from every angle. Reporters typed furiously as Marcus took his seat at the witness table, oath freshly sworn. The chairman leaned forward. "Sergeant Cole, you've become a national symbol. But today we need clarity. Did you disobey a lawful order?" Marcus met his gaze. "Yes, sir, I did." Gasps rippled through the room. "But I did so because a man's life was bleeding out in my arms. The law's purpose is to protect life, not abandon it. If saving him was disobedience, then I will not apologize." Some lawmakers nodded, others frowned. The questions came sharp and fast. "Do you believe soldiers should be free to ignore orders?" "No, sir, orders matter. But so does conscience." "Are you saying compassion should outweigh the law?" "I'm saying compassion is the law at its highest calling." His words carried across the room like steady drumbeats. Reporters scribbled madly, the phrase already destined for tomorrow's headlines. Compassion is the law at its highest calling. Outside, the crowd grew restless as the hearing dragged on. Large screens broadcast Marcus's testimony live. Each time he spoke, cheers rippled through the plaza. Veterans saluted, families wept, students chanted louder. Naomi watched from the edge of the crowd, her heart swelling. "He's not just speaking for himself anymore," she whispered to a reporter beside her. "He's speaking for all of us." But not far away, Brett Kincaid lurked in the shadows of the city. He had driven all night, his car parked blocks from the Capitol. He watched the screens with burning eyes, hearing the chants that once mocked him echo through streets he didn't belong to. "They crown him a saint," Kincaid muttered. "They bury me deeper every time they cheer." In his pocket, his old badge felt like dead weight. He gripped it tightly, whispering, "Respect. I'll take it back." Inside the hearing room, Marcus concluded his testimony. "I am not above the law. No one is. But the law must serve its purpose, to preserve dignity, to protect life. Without that, it is just ink on paper." The room erupted in applause. Some lawmakers banged their gavels for order, but even they couldn't hide the shift. Marcus's words had landed like a verdict of their own. Afterward, as he stepped back onto the Capitol steps, the roar of the crowd was deafening. Flags waved, chants rolled, candles burned even in daylight. Naomi ran to him, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Marcus. You gave them what they needed." Marcus shook his head softly. "No, I gave them what was already theirs. I just reminded them." That night, the city glowed with vigils. From Atlanta to Los Angeles, from Chicago to New York, candles lit the dark. News anchors declared it the day respect reached Washington. In his hotel room, Marcus sat quietly, watching the coverage. Naomi sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. "You carried them again," she whispered. Marcus closed his eyes. "I just hope they carry themselves now." But across town, Brett Kincaid's shadow grew darker. Alone in his car, he stared at the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. His laughter returned, low and bitter. "This isn't over," he whispered. "If the system won't silence him, I will." The respect movement was rising, but so too was a storm no one yet saw coming. The morning after Marcus's testimony, headlines dominated every outlet. "Cole captivates Congress. Respect movement surges. Compassion is the law at its highest calling." Clips of his words spread across social media, set to music, repeated like scripture. Crowds that had filled the Capitol steps lingered through the night, turning the marble plaza into a sea of candles. Marcus woke in his hotel room to the faint sound of chanting outside. Thousands still gathered, calling his name. Naomi opened the curtains, her face pale with awe. "They didn't go home," she whispered. "They stayed all night." Marcus sat at the edge of the bed, running a hand down his face. "I gave them words. They gave me their voices. But what happens when I can't carry them anymore?" Naomi knelt beside him. "You've carried enough. Now it's their turn." Later that morning, Aisha ushered Marcus into a press briefing. Reporters packed the room, cameras pointed, microphones angled. "Sergeant Cole, do you believe your case will change laws nationwide?" one asked. "I don't write laws," Marcus replied evenly. "I only spoke the truth. What you do with it is your choice." Another shouted, "Do you plan to run for office?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I'm a soldier, not a politician. I serve by standing calm, not by chasing power." Yet the crowd erupted with applause, some chanting, "Cole for Congress." The idea rippled instantly across social feeds, sparking debates. Marcus frowned, uneasy. Meanwhile, in a dim parking garage blocks from the Capitol, Brett Kincaid leaned against his car, scribbling in a notebook. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his movements jerky. The roar of chants from outside reached even here, muffled but constant. "They worship him," Kincaid muttered. "Every word, every breath. They forget who gives the orders, who keeps order." He slammed the notebook shut. "If they won't remember me, I'll make them." He pulled his old badge from his pocket, tracing its worn edges. The metal no longer shone, but to him it gleamed with twisted purpose. Back at the hotel, Naomi scrolled through her phone. "Marcus, listen to this. Cities are organizing simultaneous vigils tonight. They're calling it a national show of respect." Marcus leaned against the window, watching the crowd below. "One spark starts a fire, but if it spreads too fast, it burns out." Aisha set her tablet down. "Or it changes everything. Don't underestimate what you've started." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't start it. Their laughter did. Their injustice did. I just stood where they tried to push me down." Naomi touched his arm. "And because you stood, we're all standing now." That evening, Marcus returned to the Capitol steps to address the vigil. The plaza was packed shoulder to shoulder, candles glowing like 1,000 stars. The crowd hushed as he stepped to the microphone. "I didn't come here to lead you," Marcus began, his voice calm but carrying. "I came because truth needed a voice. If that truth inspires you, then carry it, not as my movement, but as your own. Respect belongs to everyone." The crowd erupted, the chant rising. "Respect! Respect!" Veterans saluted. Families wept. Children waved flags. Naomi, standing beside him, whispered, "Look at them, Marcus. You gave them hope." Marcus whispered back, "I just reminded them they already had it." But in the shadows at the edge of the crowd, Brett Kincaid watched. His eyes were hollow, his jaw clenched. Every cheer felt like a knife. "They forgot me," he muttered. "But I won't let them forget." He turned, slipping back into the night, the sound of chants echoing in his skull. Later, in the quiet of his hotel room, Marcus sat on the balcony. The city lights stretched below, candles still glowing faintly on the plaza. Naomi joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You look strong tonight," she said softly. Marcus shook his head. "I felt tired. Strong men get tired too." She smiled faintly. "Then let us carry you for once." Marcus closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "If respect is earned, then maybe I've done my part. The rest is theirs." Across town, Kincaid sat alone in his car, the badge in his hand. His bitter laugh returned, low and sharp. "They'll see," he whispered. "They'll all see." The respect movement was rising higher than anyone expected, but in the growing shadow, danger was rising with it. The respect movement reached its peak that weekend. From New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Houston, city squares filled with candles, banners, and chants. News networks broadcast live streams from 20 cities at once, an ocean of voices all crying the same word: respect. Marcus Cole watched from his hotel window in Washington, his reflection caught between the glass and the glow of the vigil below. His face looked older than he remembered, lines etched by war, by trial, by expectation. He whispered, "I was just one man carrying another. How did it become this?" Naomi stood behind him, her phone buzzing nonstop. She placed it down, stepped closer. "Because people needed someone to remind them that compassion still matters. You gave them proof." Marcus turned. "I gave them one night, Naomi, that's all. I don't know if I can give them more." Aisha entered, tablet in hand. "They're asking for you again. Another speech, another interview, another march. You've become the anchor of something too big to step away from." Marcus shook his head, his voice firm but weary. "I never wanted to be anyone's anchor. Anchors sink ships too." Across the city, Brett Kincaid lurked in the back of a crowded bar. The TV above the counter blared footage of Marcus's testimony and the massive vigils. The patrons cheered, raising glasses each time Marcus's words replayed. Kincaid's face twisted. "They drink to him like he's a saint," he muttered. "And me, I'm the punchline." A man down the bar sneered. "Maybe because you laughed at him when he didn't deserve it. People don't forget things like that." Kincaid's hand slammed the counter. "You think you know me? You think you know what order means?" The bartender intervened. "Cool it, Brett. Nobody's here for your bitterness." Laughter rippled again, but this time it wasn't his. Kincaid shoved back his stool, storming into the night. In his car, he sat gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. His badge lay on the passenger seat, the edges dulled, the shine gone. "They buried me," he whispered, "but I'll make them dig me up, one way or another." Back in Washington, Marcus finally agreed to address a rally outside the Capitol. The plaza stretched farther than he could see, flags waving, candles glowing even in daylight, chants rising like thunder. When he stepped to the microphone, silence fell. "I didn't come here to lead," Marcus began, his voice steady. "I came here to witness. I came because truth deserves a voice. But remember this: movements don't belong to one man. They belong to everyone who stands for them. If you want respect to live, then carry it yourself. Don't wait for me." The crowd roared, the chant rolling louder. "Respect! Respect!" Naomi watched from the side, her eyes shining with pride but also with worry. She could see the weight pressing on her brother's shoulders, the burden of carrying more than he had ever asked to bear. That night, in the quiet of the hotel room, Marcus sat on the balcony, head in his hands. Naomi joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "You looked strong out there," she whispered. "I felt tired," Marcus admitted. "Every word feels heavier now. Every face out there, each one expects something from me. But what if I can't give it?" Naomi placed a hand on his arm. "You've already given enough. They're carrying you now. That's what respect really means. It doesn't stay with one person. It spreads." Marcus exhaled slowly, nodding. "Then let it spread. I just want to rest." But rest wouldn't come. Across town, Brett Kincaid sat in his car, parked where he could see the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. His notebook lay open on the passenger seat, scribbled with plans, maps, times. The chants from the plaza echoed faintly through the streets, seeping into his mind like poison. "They think he won," Kincaid muttered. "But the story isn't finished, not yet." He picked up his badge, pressed it hard into his palm until it left a mark. His laughter returned, quiet, cracked, dangerous. "This time," he whispered, "they'll respect me." In the plaza below the Capitol, the crowd sang softly, voices rising into the night sky like a hymn. Candles flickered in the wind, steady despite the storm brewing unseen. And in his room above, Marcus listened, torn between exhaustion and the faintest flicker of hope. He whispered into the night, "If this is what respect looks like, then maybe it's worth the wait." But somewhere in the shadows, Kincaid's silence promised that the storm was far from over. By the end of the week, the respect movement was no longer just a chant on courthouse steps, it was a national current. City councils debated resolutions inspired by Marcus's testimony. Senators gave floor speeches quoting his words, "Compassion is the law at its highest calling." News anchors framed him as the moral compass of a restless nation. Marcus hated it. He sat in a quiet conference room at the hotel, reporters waiting outside the door like vultures. Naomi paced nervously. Aisha scrolled through a flood of requests on her phone. "They want you on primetime tonight," Aisha said. "Every network. They're fighting for you." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I'm not a prize to be fought over. I'm a man who made a choice one night, that's all." Naomi stopped pacing. "That choice saved a life, and now it's saving others. Look!" She thrust her phone toward him, showing a clip of a small-town police officer speaking at a vigil. "We can protect lives without losing order. Sergeant Cole reminded us of that." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then let them speak. I'm tired of speaking for everyone." But both women knew. Silence wasn't an option anymore. Meanwhile, Brett Kincaid's descent grew darker. Termination had stripped his badge, but not his obsession. He spent long nights in his dingy apartment, blinds drawn, TV blaring with Marcus's face. His notebook was now filled with scrawled maps, notes about vigils, names of lawmakers. "They erased me," he muttered, pacing. "They turned me into nothing. And him, he's everything." He stared at the badge lying on his table, the metal dull but sharp in his mind. His laugh cracked through the silence, bitter and unhinged. "Respect. I'll take it back. They'll remember me again." Back in Washington, Marcus finally relented to a network interview. He sat under bright lights, the Capitol dome glowing in the backdrop. The anchor leaned forward. "Sergeant Cole, you've become the face of a movement. How do you respond to those who say you're more symbol than man now?" Marcus's eyes held steady. "Symbols fade. Men fade. What lasts is truth. If people see dignity in what I did, then let them carry that. Not me." The anchor pressed. "Would you ever consider running for office?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't want power. I want peace. But if my words can stop another man from being mocked for saving a life, then I'll keep speaking until they listen." The interview went viral within hours. Clips flooded timelines. Hashtags surged again. #truth lasts. #peace not power. Naomi watched from the wings, pride swelling, but also fear. Each word her brother spoke made him bigger, brighter, and more of a target. That night, the plaza outside the Capitol glowed again. Thousands gathered with candles, their chants rising like thunder. "Respect, respect." Veterans saluted, families sang, students held banners that read, "Carry the truth." Marcus stepped out to greet them, exhaustion heavy in his bones but dignity steady in his stance. "I am just one man," he told them, "but together we are stronger than any courtroom, stronger than any laughter. Respect belongs to you." The roar of approval shook the air. Naomi whispered, "They'd follow you anywhere." Marcus turned to her, weary. "And that terrifies me." Across the city, Kincaid sat in his car on a dark street, engine idling. He had parked close enough to hear the chants faintly in the distance. The sound scraped at him like claws. "They cheer his name," he muttered, gripping the wheel. "But soon they'll say mine again." His eyes flicked to the notebook on the passenger seat, pages marked with circles and arrows. Plans that no longer looked like scribbles. His laugh returned, low and broken. "Respect. They'll give it back to me." Back at the hotel, Marcus collapsed onto the bed, drained. Naomi sat beside him, brushing his sleeve. "You carried them tonight, again." Marcus shook his head. "No, they carried themselves. I just reminded them they could." She smiled faintly. "That's why they love you. You don't take the credit." Marcus closed his eyes, whispering, "Maybe that's why the weight feels heavier. Because I never asked for it." Aisha entered quietly. "Tomorrow, Congress will call again. They want you on record for new reform proposals. It's moving faster than anyone expected." Marcus exhaled. "Then tomorrow, I'll stand again. But tonight, I need silence." He drifted into uneasy sleep as chants still echoed faintly through the city. Respect, respect. But in the shadows, Brett Kincaid's silence was turning lethal. His badge pressed against his palm like a weapon, his notebook filled with dark intent. The respect movement was rising higher each day, but so too was the storm gathering in secret. The respect movement was no longer confined to city plazas. By midweek, marches filled highways, vigils lit up stadiums, and petitions flooded lawmakers' inboxes. Washington buzzed with the phrase Marcus had etched into the national conscience: "Compassion is the law at its highest calling." In hotel conference rooms, senators and aides now treated Marcus Cole as if he were a statesman rather than a soldier acquitted only weeks before. He sat through meeting after meeting, his patience thinning with each scripted speech. "You've become the face of this," one senator said. "If you endorse these reforms, the bill will pass faster than any of us imagined." Marcus leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "I won't endorse politics. I'll endorse dignity. If your bill protects that, then it will stand on its own." Naomi watched from the corner, her heart swelling with pride but also worry. Every word Marcus spoke, every stand he took, seemed to carve him deeper into the role of symbol. She knew he didn't want it, but the tide had swept him in. Meanwhile, Brett Kincaid's tide had turned darker. His apartment floor was littered with empty bottles, his walls plastered with scribbled notes and maps. At the center of his table lay his old badge, polished until it gleamed again under the lamp. "They gave him respect," Kincaid muttered, pacing. "But they forgot me. They laughed at me." He stared at the notebook filled with plans, routes to rallies, lists of public figures attending, times of Marcus's appearances. His laugh cracked through the silence, jagged and bitter. "They'll remember me," he whispered. "They'll have to." For the first time, he packed a small duffel bag, sliding his badge into the pocket like a weapon. That evening, Marcus stood once more on the Capitol steps before a crowd so large it spilled into the streets. Veterans held flags, students raised candles, families chanted his name. "I'm not your leader," Marcus told them, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "I'm your reminder. Respect doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to everyone who stands for it." The chant rolled louder. "Respect! Respect!" Naomi stood beside him, whispering, "You can't fight this, Marcus. You are their leader now." Marcus exhaled, his eyes heavy. "Then God help me carry it right." Back at the hotel, Aisha confronted him. "You're in danger," she said, sliding a file onto the table. "We've received threats, anonymous but credible. You need security." Marcus shook his head. "I didn't stand chained in court just to surround myself with guards now." Naomi frowned. "Marcus, please. This isn't about pride. This is about survival." He looked at her, weary. "If respect costs me hiding behind walls, then it's not respect. But I'll be careful, that's all I can promise." Across town, Kincaid tested his plans. He drove near the Capitol, watching the security patrols, noting where the crowds funneled in, where Marcus usually appeared. His eyes were cold, calculating. "They chant for him like he's untouchable," Kincaid muttered. "But no one's untouchable." He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his badge glinting in the dim light. His laugh returned, sharper now, edged with something final. The next morning, Marcus faced Congress again. Lawmakers debated fiercely, some praising him, others warning that his acquittal undermined order. When asked to speak, Marcus stood tall. I don't argue that laws matter. They do. But laws without compassion become cages. I chose life that night. If that's guilt, then let compassion be guilty too. The hearing room erupted in applause, reporters scribbling furiously. Outside, the crowd cheered as the words echoed on large screens. Naomi whispered to Aisha, "Every time he speaks, the movement grows bigger, but so does the danger." Aisha nodded grimly, and danger doesn't always announce itself. That night, Marcus sat quietly in his hotel room, staring at the city lights. Naomi joined him on the balcony. "You carried them again today," she said softly. Marcus shook his head. "I just told the truth." She touched his arm. "And that truth is what's keeping them standing." For a moment, peace flickered across his face, but deep inside he felt the storm pressing closer. On the other side of the city, Brett Kincaid zipped his duffel shut. His badge gleamed from the pocket, his eyes hollow with rage. "They think he's the law now," Kincaid muttered, "but I'll remind them who gives orders." He slung the bag over his shoulder, his laughter echoing in the empty apartment. The storm Marcus feared was no longer approaching. It was already here. The rally on the National Mall was the largest yet. Tens of thousands filled the grass stretching from the Lincoln Memorial to the steps of the Capitol, their candles flickering like a constellation pulled to earth. Veterans in faded uniforms stood side by side with college students, families, and clergy. The chant rose in waves, rolling across the night sky. "Respect! Respect!" Marcus Cole stood backstage, his heart heavy. Naomi held his arm, sensing his unease. "This is history, Marcus. They came because of you." Marcus shook his head. "They came because of truth. I just happened to speak it first." Aisha checked her watch, her voice brisk. "Security's tight. The Secret Service added detail after the threats. You'll be safe." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He knew too well that no system was foolproof. Across the crowd, Brett Kincaid moved like a shadow. A baseball cap pulled low, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The chants cut through him like knives. Every cheer for Marcus felt like a jeer at him. His badge, hidden in his pocket, pressed against his leg like a blade. "They forgot me," he muttered, weaving through the bodies. "But tonight, they'll remember." He scanned the stage, his jaw clenched, his plan sharp in his mind. Marcus stepped to the podium and the roar erupted. The crowd quieted instantly, waiting. His voice carried calm, steady, solemn. "I stand here tonight not as a leader, but as a witness. A witness to the truth that respect is stronger than hate, that dignity is not demanded, it is earned. And when we carry each other, we carry the law at its highest calling." The chant erupted. "Respect! Respect!" Marcus raised a hand. "But remember, this movement is not mine. It is yours. Carry it forward. Don't let it fade with me." Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she watched. Aisha stood rigid, scanning the edges of the crowd. Something felt off. Kincaid pushed closer. His breath came sharp, his hands trembling as he slipped the badge from his pocket. He held it up for a moment, the metal glinting under the floodlights. To him, it was still power, still order. "They'll respect me again," he whispered. But as he moved, a group of veterans noticed him. One recognized his face from the trial coverage. "That's the cop," the man muttered. "The one who mocked him." Eyes turned. Whispers spread. Kincaid froze under the sudden weight of recognition. On stage, Marcus saw the shift ripple through the front rows. He followed their gaze, his eyes locking onto Kincaid's. For a long silent second, soldier and officer stared at each other across the sea of candles. Marcus's voice cut through the tension, firm but calm. "You came for respect, didn't you, officer?" The crowd hushed, eyes swinging between them. Security moved in, but Marcus raised a hand, holding them back. "You think respect is taken by force," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the mall. "But respect is earned in how we treat each other. You lost it when you laughed at dignity. You'll never get it back through fear." Kincaid's hand shook, his grip tightening on the badge. His laughter burst out, cracked and broken. "They forgot me. You took everything." Marcus stepped forward, unflinching. "No, officer, you gave it away yourself." The silence was thunderous. The crowd stood frozen, waiting. Kincaid's face contorted. For a moment it seemed rage would drive him over the edge. But then the chant rose again, soft at first, then louder, rolling like a wave. "Respect! Respect!" The sound engulfed the mall. Thousands of voices united, drowning out Kincaid's broken laughter. Veterans saluted. Families lifted candles higher. Kincaid staggered back, the badge slipping from his hand, clattering to the ground. He fell to his knees, the chant pounding in his ears, his power gone. Security moved in, restraining him quickly, but the crowd never broke rhythm. "Respect! Respect!" Marcus stood at the podium, his chest heavy but steady. "Respect will never belong to one man," he said, his voice carrying above the chant. "It belongs to all who choose compassion over hate. That is the law at its highest calling. That is our victory tonight." The chant thundered louder, filling the night sky. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Naomi gripped Marcus's arm. "You faced him without fear." Marcus shook his head. "I was afraid. But fear doesn't rule respect. Courage does." Aisha exhaled, her relief obvious. "You ended it tonight, not just the trial, the shadow too." Marcus looked out over the mall, where candles still glowed faintly in the grass. "No," he whispered, "I didn't end it. They did. Together." In custody, Brett Kincaid sat in silence, his laughter gone. The badge lay bagged as evidence, no longer his shield. For the first time, he understood the truth Marcus had carried all along. Respect cannot be demanded, cannot be stolen. It is earned. On the Capitol steps, as the last candles flickered out, Marcus whispered into the night, "Dignity stood tonight, and it will stand tomorrow." And for once, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter, because it was no longer his alone. The night of the rally lingered in the nation's memory. Videos of Marcus facing Brett Kincaid on the National Mall replayed across every network. Headlines screamed, "Respect defeats hate," "Soldier stares down laughter," "Movement holds strong." For the first time in weeks, Marcus Cole woke to silence. No chants outside his window, no gavel banging in a courtroom, no reporters at his door. Just silence. He sat at the small hotel desk, hands folded, staring at the morning light filtering through the curtains. Naomi entered quietly, 2 coffees in hand. "You look lighter," she said softly. Marcus nodded, taking the cup. "Because it's not mine anymore. Last night proved it. The people carried respect themselves. I don't need to hold it for them." Naomi smiled faintly. "But they'll still look to you." "I know," Marcus sighed. "But maybe now, they'll start looking to each other too." Across the city, Kincaid sat in a holding cell, stripped of everything but a gray jumpsuit. His laughter was gone. The badge that once gleamed in his hand was sealed away in evidence. For the first time, he wasn't mocking anyone. He was silent. A guard passed his cell and muttered, "You lost to dignity, officer." Kincaid's eyes twitched, but no sound came. The man who once laughed in a courtroom now sat alone, swallowed by the silence of his own downfall. Back at the hotel, Aisha read aloud the early reactions to Marcus's speech. "Lawmakers are already drafting proposals named after you," she said. "They're calling them the Cole Amendments." Marcus grimaced. "I don't want my name in their books. Let the law stand on its own." Aisha adjusted her glasses. "That's not how history works, Marcus. Symbols become names. Names become laws. Whether you like it or not, you've been written in." Naomi placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "At least this time, the writing is just." Later that day, Marcus insisted on walking the city without escorts. Naomi and Aisha followed reluctantly. As they moved through the streets, people recognized him instantly. Strangers stopped to shake his hand. Veterans saluted. Children waved flags. One young woman pressed a candle into his palm. "You gave us back hope," she whispered. Marcus looked into her eyes, steady and kind. "No, you gave it back to yourselves. Don't forget that." She nodded, tears glistening before fading into the crowd. Naomi whispered as they walked on, "Everywhere you go, it's like a vigil follows you." Marcus frowned. Vigils can't last forever. The real test is what they do when the candles burn out. That evening, Naomi turned on the news. Across the country, vigils were evolving into town halls. Communities weren't just chanting anymore, they were organizing. Police chiefs met with veterans, students drafted petitions, families shared stories of dignity denied and demanded change. Naomi's eyes widened. "Marcus, look, they're building something without you." Marcus leaned forward, his chest heavy but proud. "Good. That's how it should be. Respect can't belong to one man. It has to live in everyone." Across the river, in his dark cell, Kincaid sat alone, the faint sound of chants from a distant vigil reaching through the concrete. He pressed his palms to his ears, but the echo wouldn't stop. "Respect," he muttered bitterly. "Respect killed me." For the first time, his own word felt heavier than laughter had ever been. As the night settled, Marcus stood on the balcony of his hotel room, Naomi beside him. The city below glowed with candles still burning, though fewer than before. "You think it'll fade?" she asked quietly. Marcus took a long breath. Everything fades. But if even a piece of this stays, if even one man in one courtroom remembers that respect matters, then it was worth it. Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think it's more than a piece. I think you've lit a fire." Marcus gazed out at the horizon, where the Capitol dome gleamed faintly in the dark. "Then let's hope it doesn't burn out too soon." Morning light spilled across Washington as the respect movement entered its next phase. The chants had quieted, the candles dimmed, but the energy hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. Community centers buzzed with meetings, veterans gathered in local halls, students filled gymnasiums, all discussing the same thing: how to turn a cry into a cause. Marcus Cole followed the reports quietly from his hotel room. Naomi scrolled through endless videos. Town halls packed with voices, police chiefs shaking hands with veterans, teachers leading discussions about dignity in classrooms. "Look," Naomi said, her voice bright, "it's happening without you. They're standing on their own." Marcus leaned against the window, arms folded. Relief flickered across his face. "That's what I hoped for. Respect isn't supposed to be a monument, it's supposed to move." Aisha entered with folders under her arm. "Lawmakers are already drafting bills. They want you in the room, Marcus. They see you as the spark." Marcus shook his head firmly. "I'll testify if it helps, but I won't be their figurehead. The spark doesn't belong to me anymore." Across the river, Brett Kincaid stared through the bars of his cell. His body slumped, but his mind still burned. The chant still echoed in his head, softer now but constant. "Respect," he muttered. "They chant it while I rot." Another inmate leaned from the bunk above. "That's what happens when you mock the wrong man." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "He stole everything." The inmate shrugged. "Maybe he just earned what you threw away." The words stung deeper than the bars ever could. That afternoon, Marcus walked with Naomi through a quiet Washington park. For once, no cameras followed, no chants echoed, just birds and wind. They sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Naomi smiled faintly. "Feels almost normal, doesn't it?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Almost. But normal doesn't stay long anymore." "You regret it?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, I regret that it had to be me, but not what came of it." Naomi leaned against him. "Maybe that's the point. Respect chose you because you never asked for it." That evening, the National Mall hosted a vigil unlike the others. Instead of chants, there were speeches, from veterans, teachers, community leaders. Marcus attended quietly at the edge, Naomi and Aisha beside him. He refused the podium, watching instead as others carried the message. A young student stepped up, her voice trembling but proud. "Sergeant Cole reminded us that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. From now on, this is our movement, all of ours." The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus felt his chest tighten, not with burden, but with release. Naomi whispered, "You see, you don't have to carry it anymore." Marcus nodded slowly. "Good, because it's heavier than one man should ever hold." In the prison across town, Kincaid sat alone, watching a grainy TV bolted to the wall. The broadcast showed the vigil, the students' words, the applause. He clenched his fists until his nails cut his palms. "They cheer her now," he muttered. "They cheer anyone but me." For the first time, there was no laughter left in him, only silence. Later that night, Marcus returned to his hotel balcony. The city stretched before him, calmer now, candles replaced by streetlights. He breathed deep, savoring the quiet. Naomi joined him, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You carried them through fire," she said softly. "Now they're walking on their own." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "That's how it should be. A soldier carries when others can't. But when they can walk again, you let go." A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe now I can finally rest." Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "You've earned it." The respect movement no longer needed Marcus's voice at its center, and for the first time he allowed himself to believe that dignity had finally stood, not just for him, but for everyone. For the first time in months, Marcus Cole woke up without the sound of chants or the clang of chains. The hotel room was still, the morning sun spilling across the carpet. He sat up slowly, listening to the silence, almost afraid to breathe too deeply in case it shattered. Naomi knocked softly before entering, carrying a tray of breakfast. "You look like a man who's forgotten what quiet feels like," she teased gently. Marcus smiled faintly. "Quiet feels heavier than noise sometimes. When people chant your name, you don't have time to think. In silence, all the weight catches up." She set the tray down. "Then let it catch you. You've earned a day to stop running." Across the city, the respect movement had shifted gears. Instead of massive rallies, smaller circles formed. Town halls, workshops, meetings in church basements and community centers. They discussed reforms, drafted proposals, taught children about dignity and compassion. A reporter on television called it the second phase. "The movement is no longer about Marcus Cole," she explained. "It's about every community choosing respect as a way of life." Marcus watched the segment from the hotel sofa, coffee in hand. Relief flickered across his face. "Good," he murmured. "It's theirs now." Aisha nodded from her chair. "Movements only last when they outgrow their symbols. You did your part. Now you can step back." But Marcus wasn't so sure. "Stepping back doesn't mean stepping away. I'll always carry it, even in silence." In his prison cell, Brett Kincaid wrestled with silence of a different kind. Gone were the cameras, the crowds, even the jeers. He was alone with nothing but the echo of his own choices. At first he tried to fill the void with laughter, forcing the sound until his throat hurt, but it rang hollow, bouncing off the concrete like a cruel reminder that no one was listening anymore. One afternoon, a guard slid a newspaper under his door. The headline read, "Respect Movement Expands to 50 Cities." Kincaid stared at it for a long time. Then he tore it to shreds, the pieces scattering like ashes across the floor. "They erased me," he whispered. "But maybe being erased is worse than chains." Meanwhile, Naomi convinced Marcus to take a walk through a quiet Washington neighborhood. No cameras, no speeches, just a brother and sister moving among ordinary life. Children played in a park, parents chatted on benches, dogs barked in the distance. For once, no one stopped Marcus for photos or questions. "This feels normal," Marcus admitted, watching the children laugh. Naomi smiled. "Maybe normal is the real victory. You carried respect into the storm, and now they carry it into their everyday lives." Marcus breathed deeply, the weight in his chest easing. If respect can live here, in playgrounds, in sidewalks, in homes, then maybe it will last. That evening, the three of them, Marcus, Naomi, and Aisha, sat together at the hotel table. Papers were spread out, but for once they weren't legal documents. They were letters from across the country. Aisha read one aloud. "Dear Sergeant Cole, I used to think compassion made me weak. Then I saw you stand in that courtroom, calm while others mocked. Now I know strength looks different. Thank you." Naomi's eyes shimmered. "You've touched people you'll never meet." Marcus folded the letter carefully. "Then let them touch others in turn. That's the only way it keeps living." In his cell, Kincaid finally stopped pacing. He sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. The laughter that had once defined him was gone. In its place was a void he didn't know how to fill. A fellow inmate muttered from across the hall, "You hear the news? That soldier's words are changing laws." Kincaid closed his eyes, the words slicing deeper than any sentence could. For the first time, he didn't argue. He just sat in silence, crushed beneath the respect he had tried and failed to bury. That night, Marcus returned to the balcony, Naomi beside him as always. The city glowed softly. No chants, no rallies, just quiet streets and scattered candles. "You think it's really over?" Naomi asked. Marcus exhaled. "The storm is over. But storms always leave scars. People will forget in time. My job now is to remind them without speaking, by living the truth I carried." Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I'll remind you when you forget." For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that respect might not just survive the storm, it might finally begin to heal it. Weeks passed, and Washington settled into a quieter rhythm. The chants that once shook the Capitol steps faded into steady conversations in classrooms, town halls, and city councils. Respect was no longer just a cry in the streets, it was an idea rooted in daily life. Marcus Cole walked along a quiet street with Naomi one cool morning. For the first time, he wasn't recognized at every corner. People still glanced, some smiled, but they didn't rush him. Instead, they let him be. Naomi nudged him gently. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" Marcus nodded. "This is what I hoped for. Respect has to live in them, not in me." Naomi smiled. But you lit the spark, Marcus. Don't forget that. He didn't reply, but inside, he felt the weight loosening little by little. In the communities across America, the spark indeed burned on. Veterans organized programs to mentor young people. Police departments introduced training modules built around dignity and compassion. Students held forums in gymnasiums, their chants replaced with conversations about fairness and justice. Reporters called it the Quiet Revolution. Headlines read, "From chants to change, respect movement shapes policy. Cole effect reshapes communities." Marcus read the articles in silence one evening, setting the papers down with a faint sigh. "They make it sound bigger than it is," he murmured. Naomi shook her head. "It's already bigger than you think. And maybe that's good. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." In his prison cell, Brett Kincaid felt the walls close tighter every day. At first he shouted, laughed, tried to drown out the world. Now he barely spoke at all. His cellmate asked once, "What's wrong with you?" Kincaid's voice cracked. "They chant his name while I rot. They remember him, not me." The cellmate shrugged. "He earned it. You lost it." The words hollowed Kincaid further. His badge was gone, his laughter silenced, his name erased by a single word he could never reclaim. Respect. Back in Washington, Marcus and Aisha attended a quiet gathering at a community center. No cameras, no speeches, just veterans, students, and families sharing stories. An older veteran stood and said, "Sergeant Cole reminded us that compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. And strength doesn't fade when the candles burn out. It grows." A student added, "We don't need Marcus to lead us anymore. We carry it ourselves." Marcus sat silently, listening. For once he didn't feel pressure to respond. The movement was speaking with its own voice. Naomi leaned close, whispering, "Do you hear that? You've been set free." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief washing over him. Later, as they walked home under the glow of streetlights, Naomi asked, "What will you do now? You're free, Marcus, not just from the trial but from the weight." Marcus thought for a long moment. "Maybe I'll go back to medicine, back to saving lives quietly. Respect doesn't need me on a stage anymore. It needs me in the world, doing what I've always done." Naomi smiled. "That sounds like the brother I know." News outlets still covered the respect movement, but now Marcus's face appeared less often. Instead, it was students, veterans, and families carrying the message forward. The shift gave him the space he had prayed for. Aisha told him one evening, "You're no longer the symbol, you're the seed. And seeds aren't meant to be seen forever, they're meant to grow into something larger." Marcus nodded. "Then let them grow. My part is done." Across town in the prison library, Kincaid sat at a table with an untouched book before him. His reflection in the glass window was gaunt, unfamiliar. He muttered, "They built a world without me." The other inmates ignored him. His words, once sharp, now carried no weight. He was a man forgotten, a shadow erased by dignity's light. That night, Marcus stood once more on a balcony, Naomi at his side. The city below was calm. No chants, no crowds, just quiet neighborhoods lit by steady street lamps. "Feels different now," Naomi whispered. Marcus exhaled slowly. "Yes, the storm has passed. Respect stood, and it still stands." For the first time, the weight on his shoulders felt truly lifted. Spring settled over Washington with quiet dignity. The air no longer rang with chants on the Capitol steps, yet the respect movement was everywhere. In classrooms, in town meetings, in families teaching their children. What had once been a roar in the streets had become a rhythm in daily life. Marcus Cole walked along a river path early one morning, the mist curling above the water. For the first time in months, no cameras followed, no microphones chased him. He was just a man in a jacket breathing the cool air. Naomi walked beside him, her steps light. "You look different," she said softly. Marcus smiled faintly. "Lighter. You should. The weight isn't on you anymore." He stopped, watching the river flow. It never should have been. Respect was always bigger than one man. Naomi touched his shoulder. "And because of you, people finally saw that." That afternoon, Marcus visited a small clinic on the outskirts of the city. The doctor who greeted him knew his name instantly but said nothing, simply handing him a set of scrubs. Marcus spent the day quietly, checking pulses, cleaning wounds, listening to patients' stories. One elderly woman clasped his hand and whispered, "You're the man from the news, aren't you?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. She smiled faintly. "You don't need cameras to earn respect. You already gave it. Now you're just giving it again." The words filled him with a peace he hadn't felt in years. In prison, Brett Kincaid's collapse was complete. Once he had filled rooms with cruel laughter. Now he sat silent in the yard, staring at the ground. The other inmates passed him without notice. He was no longer feared, no longer followed. Forgotten. A guard dropped a newspaper on the bench beside him. The headline read, "Respect Movement Passes First National Reform Bill." Kincaid didn't read it. He simply pushed the paper aside, muttering, "They wrote him into law. They wrote me out of history." His voice cracked into silence. For the first time, he understood what Marcus had told him. Respect cannot be demanded, cannot be taken, it must be earned. And he had thrown it away. Back in the city, Naomi and Aisha joined Marcus at a modest community gathering. Children recited lines from his testimony, not like scripture, but like lessons woven into their lives. Compassion is the law at its highest calling. Afterward, Naomi whispered, "You realize, don't you? This isn't your movement anymore. It's theirs." Marcus nodded, relief softening his face. Good. That's how movements survive, when they stop belonging to one voice. One quiet evening, Marcus returned to the National Mall. The crowds were gone now, the steps empty, the grass bare. Only a few wax stains remained where thousands of candles had once flickered. He walked slowly across the space, remembering the roar of chants, the moment of silence when he faced Kincaid, the wave of respect that had risen from the people. Naomi joined him, her hand slipping into his. "Strange to see it so quiet." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not strange, it's right. Movements aren't meant to live forever in chants. They're meant to live in choices. And those choices are still being made, every day." They stood in silence for a long moment, the city lights glowing around them. Later, as they sat together on the balcony of Naomi's apartment, Marcus finally spoke words he had carried too long. "I was afraid, Naomi. Afraid I'd break under the weight. Afraid I wasn't enough. But respect never needed me to be perfect. It just needed me to stand." Naomi's eyes shimmered. "And you did." Marcus exhaled slowly, peace settling over him. "Then maybe my work is done." In the weeks that followed, life found its balance. The respect movement continued without Marcus at its center. Laws were debated, schools taught lessons of dignity, families spoke about compassion at dinner tables. And Marcus? He returned to medicine, to quiet service, to being a man rather than a symbol. People still recognized him sometimes, but instead of chants or cameras, they simply nodded, smiled, and said one word that carried everything he had fought for: respect. In a cell across the city, Brett Kincaid sat alone, his laughter long gone. Forgotten by the world, he finally understood the truth he had mocked. Respect was never his to demand. One evening, Marcus stood once more on a quiet balcony, Naomi beside him. The city stretched peaceful beneath them. No rallies, no riots, just life, steady and enduring. He whispered into the night, "Justice stood, respect stood, and dignity will stand long after me." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft. "Adalet Yarini Buldu, Marcus." And for the first time since the trial began, Marcus allowed himself to believe it was true.